Hey everybody, I'm Tim here with some new details on cigars and your health. And you're watching Cigars Daily. In this video, I'm enjoying Gran Habano's Connecticut Blue in Green. And I want to invite you to get even more out of this video when you watch it on cigarsdailyplus.com, because we're always working to make it better on Cigars Daily Plus. As you make your way through the amazing world of premium cigars, eventually you're going to think about how this impacts your health. And you'll either think about it because it pops up in your mind as you're enjoying a cigar, or maybe your spouse makes you think about it by asking you all the time, isn't that bad for you? And it's certainly something we should think about and be concerned with. You only get one life, and in that life, you only get one body. So it's good to take care of it and think carefully about what you're putting into it. And certainly with cigars, I don't think that anybody is falsely purporting that this is good for you in any way. Certainly cigars are made of tobacco. They're not good for you. At the same time, it's a measured decision and risk that each of us have to consider when we do a lot of things in life, whether it's eating salty foods or steak or using a cell phone and holding it by your head or any one of a million things that are now dangerous. Literally the other day, I saw a study that said that they have now linked an increased risk of cancer with having multiple casual sexual partners. Even sex isn't good for you anymore. So these days, it's important to get data and details to support the things you want to do with your life. And when it comes to premium cigars, this is actually one area where we're growing and learning, and I love it because it gives each cigar smoker out there the ability to make a better and more informed decision for themselves. And this year I'm actually talking about a study that I just got a hold of. And by the way, I owe a huge thank you to Charlie Minato at Half Wheel for recommending this piece of research to me. But this one comes from the Harm Reduction Journal, and the research is entitled "The Mortality Among Male Cigar and Cigarette Smokers in the USA." And in this study, they point out a couple of things. Number one, we've been studying the effects of tobacco for decades. They say over 30 years. I think it's closer to 40, but I'm also not a researcher. And in this time, we have got a lot of data on what happens when people smoke cigarettes. The problem is we haven't always collected data on the effects and use of premium cigars. And one thing that stands out is that they're different from each other. And I'll cover that a little bit more in this video, but it's something that we need more data on for premium cigars. In the last 30 years of collecting info on the use of tobacco, we've only actually captured data on cigars in 9 of those 30 years. So these days we're learning a lot more, which is great because it's always better when we learn together. And so I want to take you through a few of my takes away from this study. And of course, I'm going to leave a link for this study and any other studies I mentioned in the description of this video on Cigars Daily Plus, so you'll have to go there to check it out. And so with no further ado, here's a few takeaways from a study on cigars and mortality and your health. The first thing that stands out to me with this study is what I already alluded to at the beginning of this video, and that's that we're still working on collecting more data. They talk about how long we've been studying, the use and effects of tobacco, and certainly with cigarettes, we understand a lot. We understand what type of diseases you can develop if you use them. And certainly with cigars, there seems to be a difference, and not that cigars are safer. I certainly would never purport that. They carry an inherent health risk, but understanding how that's different than cigarettes is a big deal, and there's a few reasons this is actually really important within the cigar world. In fact, just in the last couple of years, we've gotten a definition for premium cigars that separates them even further. They're even separate now from a lot of the type of cigarillos and small cigars, or quote-unquote cigars, that you would find in a gas station. Today, a premium cigar is something that's handmade. It uses 100% leaf and no other additives. It's got a whole leaf wrapper on the outside, a whole leaf binder, and it's at least 50% long filler by volume and has no characterizing flavor. That is the first time we've seen premium cigars, what a lot of us love, separated not just from cigarettes, but from some of the cigarillos and stuff that has a lot of other additives in it. So it at least gives us the ability to start looking at premium cigars in a more objective way. The other big issue is we've seen this in the last few years. In the past, some governing agencies have tried to regulate premium cigars in in the same way they did with cigarettes, just because they've regulated cigarettes that way in the past. The problem is, since they're two different animals, you can't just slap all the cigarette regulations on cigars and say we're good to go. You have to understand what is the impact of these, what is the use of these, and how should we train and sort of regulate these so that they're safe for people in the future. As we go forward, I hope to see a lot more studies like this one right here that actually give some kind of detail. And this is the conclusion of their study. In this, they studied 43,000 men between the ages of 40 and 79 to determine the morbidity rate, especially of those who use tobacco. And during their test period, they said there were 14,657 people or men who died from all causes. And they looked at stuff like all causes, heart disease, malignant neoplasms, cerebrovascular disease, and chronic lower respiratory diseases, and the two mutually exclusive categories, smoking related and other diseases. So of all the diseases, 14,000 plus people died during the test period. Of those people, 3,400 of them were never tobacco users. They were not consistent, regular tobacco users of any kind. And 3,200 of those people died who were exclusively cigarette users. So already we're at like 6,700 people. It's a little more than, or a little less than half of the total people who died. But of everybody who passed away during this, 176 people were exclusive users of cigars. And certainly you could take that and look at it and try to extrapolate the harm of cigars, and that doesn't go in any way to prove that cigars are better or worse than cigarettes, but certainly that there's a difference there. When you see cigarette users dying 3,200 in the same time period that 176 cigar users die, it's got to cause you to ask the question, what are the differences here and what is my health risk exposure? That is what we're actually still need a lot more data on so we can all decide whether or not it's worth it. And my next big takeaway from this has to do with sort of quantity and consumption. And that's a huge deal, especially if you're an American, because if you're American, you like both quantity and consumption. But as they looked at men 40 and over to see what's the mortality rate, they divided them up into different categories to sort of understand the risks of each. Like one category would be men who never used cigarettes or cigars, non-tobacco users, or people who use cigarettes but have never used cigars, or people who never use cigarettes but do use cigars, or people who smoke both cigarettes and cigars. And that's just 4 of their 9 categories. But by dividing people into these different areas, they were able to come up with their conclusion where they said, we found significantly increased mortality only among dual and former users of cigarettes, meaning that they found so much more risk associated with using cigarettes or using cigarettes and cigars that there seems to be a clear and undeniable fact that if you're using both, it's sort of the worst case scenario for your health. And that doesn't in any means point to like cigars being healthier or better for you. Certainly we know that cigars are not a safe alternative to cigarettes, but at the same time, as you look at them, you got to understand that the amount of these things that you're using also plays into your health. And my last big takeaway from this has to do with the method of usage. And this is hugely validating for me to see this written down on paper. And this is important because I'm a millennial and I need constant validation. But the method of use is a big player in this study. They talk about the difference between cigarettes and cigars when they say this: it has been known for decades that exclusive users of traditional cigars and pipes tend to puff and not inhale the smoke. If you didn't know this about cigars, you're not supposed to inhale them, and if you are, you should stop immediately, thus limiting systemic exposure to toxic constituents compared with cigarette smoking. A study of pipe smokers demonstrated the biomechanics of puffing. They're going to give us a literal definition of how this is different than inhaling, which involves the closure of the oropharyngeal isthmus by putting the posterior tongue in contact with the soft palate. What they mean is you raise the back of your tongue to touch the top of your mouth, and then you're not going to inhale it anymore. You're just tasting the smoke and blowing it back out. But this does constitute a significant difference between cigarettes and cigars, and there are many. When it comes to cigarettes, almost all cigarette smokers inhale the smoke into their lungs. Cigar smokers don't, and that does create a difference. Now, what is that difference? It goes right back to where we really need more data and we really need to study a lot more of what this means. When it comes to smoke, you're combusting tobacco and there are carcinogens in that, so there's always going to be a risk involved. And so there you have it, just a few important takeaways from what we're learning this year. This study just came out in January of 2021, and I'm sure there is more to follow. I get so excited to see this stuff being invested in because anytime cigars are acknowledged, it gives us another foot in the door for saying, hey, please don't regulate us out of existence and please give us a fair shake as we talk about regulation. So it's exciting for the cigar industry, but also very helpful for you at home who has to make decisions for your own life. And so I'll ask you this. Are you worried about your health? I want to talk about this in the comments for you. Do you have concerns about it? Have you got information or data to point to say, like, here's what I've learned about cigar smoking and the risk of it? And again, I'll ask you, check out this video on cigarsdailyplus.com because we're always working to make it better on Cigars Daily Plus. Thank you all so much for watching. This is Tim signing off for Cigars Daily, and I will see you in the comments.